So yeah, we can start the short breathing exercise to quiet our mind, and then followed by motivations. Then we can reflect, contemplate, Mm. Mm. At the moment when we have obtained this precious human life and have gathered all the right conducive conditions to practice the Dharma, if we don't utilize that, we never know the futures, whether we will get such a conducive and supportive condition again or not. And if we don't have the right conducive condition, it will be very challenging, extremely difficult to practice the Dharma. And without practice of the Dharma, we will not be able to overcome all the negative emotion, defilement, completely and permanently. And without that, we will continue to experience suffering, problem, pain, endlessly, one life after another life, never ending. Therefore, we have to make most of this great opportunity now that we have at the moment and not waste it through studying and reflecting, contemplating on those what we have studied. And the purpose of studying, reflecting, contemplating is not only to free ourselves from all the suffering and cause of suffering, all the delusions, but also to be able to help and benefit all sentient beings by helping them to free from all the suffering and cause of suffering, their own delusions. Therefore, by our act of coming together, studying, learning, and reflecting, contemplating, and all of these become cause and conditions to achieve full enlightenment as soon as possible. So we can be most help and benefit to all sentient beings. Okay. I prostrated the Arya-Tival gem, thus did I hear one time the Bhagavan was dwelling on the mass of Bodhi mountain in Rasgiha, together with great community with the monk and great community of Bodhisattva. At that time, the Bhagavan observed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also, at that time, the Bodhisattva Master Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Into the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wish to practice the activities of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wish to practice the activities of profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this correctly and repeatedly, beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness, form, emptiness, not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness without characteristic, unproduced, unsustained, not without stand, not division, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factor, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no order, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on and up to including no aging and death and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, Bodhisattva rely on dwelling the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awakened, unsurprised, but perfect, complete enlightenment in relying on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurprised mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that truly pacifies all suffering should be known as true since it is not false. The mantra of perfection of wisdom declared, Tata Om Gade Gade, Paragade, Parasam Gade, Bodhe Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commanded the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, Where's the son of the lineage? Is it like that? Is it like one should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated, even the Tathagata rejoiced. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Avalokiteshvara and those surrounding him, entirely along the walls of the god humans, Asura and Gandhava, overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. Sashibege Chonshe Meto Tari Rale Yende Gembade Sange Shindu Mide Uwa Dogun Namada Shin Chöba Joyous, Ururana Mendala Vania Tayami. Echo for refuge until enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merit I pray to listen to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient. Sangye Jodan Soke Tonam, Chanchu Padu Dani. Naki Shujeke Pesonangi, Dola Penche Sange Duba, Sangye Jodan Soke Tonam, Chanchu Padu Dani. Naki Shujeke Pesonam, Dola Penche Sange Duba Show. So we come to the section where on the special insight, and within that, and we were at the very beginning where it is the prerequisite of the special insight. And then we talk about one of the main prerequisite or preliminary practice is to rely on a qualified teacher who can who will be able to present unmistakably, correctly, and by relying on them, we study, and then we try to reflect on what we have studied, and having reflected on the through reflection on what we have studied, then we come to a certain certainty, convictions in our understanding. And then once we have that certainty and conviction, then in order to make that conviction, that certainty, spontaneous and all the time, then we try to meditate by repeating the practice. And so through that, then we will be able to develop the special insight. And of course, in order to special insight, we also need, as we already talked about, karma abiding, and then other practice such as moral foundation, moral discipline, and so forth. And so then Lama Tsongkhapa explained in terms of studying, then we need to rely on certain valid scriptures, that scriptures that explain Buddha's final intentions, thoughts, unmistaken, and then that is by relying on Nagarjuna's. So then I think we have come to the section where I think we are on and then even with that, then depending by relying on definite meaning instead of interpretive meaning, and we also talk about the meaning of that according to a different school of thoughts. So I think we are on page number 220, and it is where it says on the history of Madhyamaka, So again, the school of Madhyamaka, or the middle way school, is the trailblazer of that, or founder of that, is Nagarjuna. And Nagarjuna, again, in many sutras and tantra, Buddha has proclaimed that, after 400 years after Buddha passed away, then there is someone who's called in South India, in India, South, where there is it says the country of coconut, that there will be someone who's called bhikshu, called known as Nagarjuna, and then he will clarify, elucidate my teachings and my thoughts. So Buddha and many other sutras, it is clearly kind of mentioned about that, as well as Asanga as well. And so here is saying, so Nagarjuna, who can elucidate the pure thoughts of the Buddha's teachings, free from the both extremes, internalism and nihilisms. And so then here it says, in order to understand the emptiness, we should rely on the scriptures that are on the text or scriptures taught by the Nagarjunas. So then, one of the main disciple, Nagarjuna, Aradeva, and they were known as the main father and spiritual son by all the Madhyamikas, later Madhyamikas, and so then on the basis, Nagarjuna wrote many scriptures, and such as the 6 collections of the reasoning, and within that he wrote the fundamental treatise on the wisdom perfections, and that then one of his disciple, Buddhapalita, he wrote a commentary on that. So Buddhapalita wrote a commentary on that, and Baba Vega, another Madhyamika, then thought, Buddhapalita didn't understand Nagarjuna's view correctly. So then he refuted he thought there was some mistake. Buddhapalita made some misunderstood some part of that. And so then Baba Vega refuted him. And so, and then Chandrakirti then defended Buddhapalita and saying, actually Buddhapalita's writing was the correct, and it was a Baba Viveka who was mistaken. And so then he kind of, he wrote, and so then he clarified even more of that. So again, in all of their writing and refutings, Buddhapalita wrote the commentary to Nagarjunas, and when Baba Viveka kind of refuted some part, he didn't refute everything, but those who has, took many of them, but in some area where he thought he made a mistake, he tried to correct it, refuting his understanding. And then Chandrakirti said, Buddhapalita actually was not mistaken. His commentary, his understanding of the Nagarjuna's view were correct, and it is the Baba Vega who have misunderstood. And so again, Chandrakirti wrote a commentary, and thereby refuted Baba Vega. Again, he took most of the Baba Vega teaching. He didn't refute everything, but in certain area, in certain sections where he had made missing, those are that he tried to refute it. So that is how, in terms of the, so Baba Viveka is known as a Savatantrika Madhyamika, and then Buddhapalita and then Chandrakirti, they are Prasangika Madhyamika. So these are the 2 Madhyamika. Then later it came to known as 2 Madhyamikas. Of course, there are many different, according to different masters, they have different kind of terms they use, but the main term that you see, as Lama Tsongkhapa says, also in according to Chandrakirti, his own clear words, as he mentioned, that term seems to be more similar to that term he used, so that is, so among the Madhyamika, there's two schools, okay? There's school of thoughts. So as Savatantrika and Prasangika Madhyamika. And within the Savatantrika Madhyamika, then also there are two schools, and I don't know whether we need to go so much into it, but yeah. One who accepts external phenomena, and then one who does not accept external phenomena by following the minority schools. And so therefore, within the, so I don't know, I think maybe we don't need to go too much into that. So I think that's basically, and so among there, all these are great masters. All these are great Madhyamika masters of Indian Nalanda traditions. And so here, and then here Lama Tsongkhapa says, among all of them, to whom are you going to follow? Which particular master that you are going to follow? And then, Lama Tsongkhapa says, if you go to the page number 223, and where is which of the masters to follow? So that is where, and so here Lama Tsongkhapa saying to which, among all these so many different great Indian Madhyamika masters, to whom we should follow, to whom we are going to follow. So then Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here he is going to follow. He said the Kadamba masters, Lama Adisha. So Lama Adisha is the founder of the Kadamba master. Lama Adisha and all the Kadamba master of these instructions have followed the Buddha Palita and Chandrakiri, those two great masters. So here is saying also, so we are going to follow that system as the main one. So that will be Prasangika Madhyamika. Yeah, okay. So I think we will be following the footstep of Master Buddha Palita and Chandrakiri. So then next one is, in particularly how to determine the view. And again, that has, kind of 3 points. I don't need to go each of them. And then within that, the first one, identification of afflicted ignorance. Within that, there is 5 points. We can read there. And so then the first one, so here, trying to explain why the fundamental ignorance is the very root of, main root of all the afflicted emotions, defilements, and even though there are so many different defilement delusions, sometimes it is called 3 root delusions, sometimes there is 6 root delusions, 21 secondary delusions. So there are so many different delusions, and also in some other sources there is even more than that. So So among all of these delusions and afflicted emotion, which is the main delusion, the chief delusions, the root delusion. So here is saying ignorance is the one, and therefore, whereas attachment, anger, pride, and all others are, even though they are deluded and even though they are afflicted, and even though, but they are not the main one, and so therefore, here is saying, in the Buddha's teachings, Buddha taught so many different practice, method, antidote to overcome different delusions, And so here is saying the method or the meditation, the technique that Buddha taught to overcome the attachment does not necessarily act as an antidote towards anger. And the technique and the meditations, the antidote that taught to overcome anger does not necessarily overcome attachments. Also, the technique, the meditation, the practice, the antidote that is taught to overcome the, pride and afflictive, doubt, and so forth. They do not act as antidote towards necessarily act as antidote to the attachment or anger and so forth. And so, because each of those delusions are not the root of all the delusions, but on the other hand, the antidote that is taught to overcome the ignorance, the fundamental ignorance, that can act as an antidote to all the delusions. The antidote, the method, the meditation method that is taught by Buddha to overcome the fundamental ignorance, that can act as antidote to all other delusions, anger, attachment, jealousy, pride, and so forth, and so all the delusions. Why? Because that fundamental ignorance is the very root of all these delusions. Because all this delusion arises from that fundamental ignorance. So when that root of all these delusions is eliminated, then the branch that grows from that root tree of the ignorance will dry up and it will not grow. So therefore, ignorance is the basis for all the problems, all the fault, and so therefore, as it is says in a clear word by Chandrakirti, and he explained that, and also Dhammakirti also explained similar, And again, we can see, that, for example, patience, or loving kindness, compassion is the antidote towards anger. But just by having, whether it's loving kindness, compassion, or patience, is not going to overcome the attachments, because that is not, it does not directly counteract towards the attachment. On the other hand, for example, if we are attached to let's say a body, when we see the impurity of the body, essenceless of the body, unattractive of the body, then we might be able to overcome the attachment toward that, but that doesn't mean it will overcome the anger. And so we can see with our own, and same thing, as we mentioned before, for example, for the pride, and there are certain meditations, such as meditating on our elements, and through that, then we might be able to reduce and overcome the pride. But again, just by that, it doesn't, because that meditation does not contradict exactly the anger and attachment grabs, and so therefore it cannot act as a direct antidote. And so therefore, in order to act as antidote to all the delusions, then we need the antidote towards the ignorance. So that is so the meditations or antidote to the ignorance is meditating on the emptiness, emptiness, and which is by understanding the meaning of emptiness to dependent arising, and by understanding dependent arising in the meaning of emptiness. So through that, when we understand emptiness as a meaning of dependent arising, dependent arising as a meaning of emptiness, then we don't fall into any of the extreme, and then we find a middle way, free from the both extreme. Because you see emptiness, then you don't fall into the internalism. Because you see interdependence, you don't fall into nihilism. And through that, when you understand both emptiness and interdependent, in the meaning of each same in that way, when we understand both, then that is when we find the middle way, free from both extremes, and that is the antidote towards the direct antidote towards the ignorance. So here Lama Tsongkhapa is saying, unless we are able to identify the ignorance correctly, unless we are able to identify what that ignorance is correctly, if we don't understand and unable to identify correctly, then even if we try to meditate on emptiness, it might not, whatever antidote such as emptiness, it might not become effective and not hurt the ignorance if we don't identify that. And so that is very important. Therefore, then Lama Tsongkhapa was saying he's going to explain more on what that ignorance is about, what we are talking when we talk about ignorance here, this particular fundamental ignorance. I don't remember where in one of the scriptures it says, if you cannot identify the target, even if you try to hit the arrow, you will miss it, So same way, there's nothing wrong with the arrow itself, but you haven't really identified what target you are trying to hit on. And so even though you might be doing same kind of meditations on emptiness, same arrow, but when you have not identified exactly what that ignorance is that we are trying to, then you practice meditation, and so it might not become so effective. And there is I think it might be the 7th Dalai Lama, I guess, in one of his prayer, is saying, if you have been harmed by some kind of naga and it is on the east, and then you try to do some rituals, if you do the ritual on the west side, then it is not really effective, It's the same rituals, but because you missed the target, it is on the east side, but you did it on the west side, for example. So similar like that, So correctly identifying is the same You know, when we get in a battle with the enemy, you have to identify and recognize the enemy. Otherwise, you cannot destroy the enemy if you don't know who the enemy is. Even though you might have all the weapons, correct weapons, right weapons, but you don't know, if you don't identify, if you don't recognize that the real enemy, then you will not be able to overcome. Same thing here. And so that is very important, as Lama Tsongkhapa says here, very important. And that is also when you see when the many other Lam-Rim practices, and especially when you do the meditation through the 4 points, essential points. And the first essential point is identifying the ignorance. That's the first important point. Identifying the ignorance. So that is here. Then because it's so important. Yeah, so here is Lama Tsongkhapa. So then here, generally speaking, ignorance is opposite of knowledge. Not knowing. Ignorance and not knowing, whereas knowing is the knowledge. So generally, ignorance is not knowing. And of course, we have, well, I don't know, at least I have millions and billions of ignorance. So here, when we talk about identifying the ignorance, and this particular fundamental ignorance, which is the root of all the delusions, we are not talking about any kind of ignorance. Okay? So it is important to what kind of ignorance, I do not know what this cup is made out of, what kind of material it is made out of. I don't know. That is ignorance. But I don't think that ignorance is not the root of all my delusions. Okay? It is ignorance, but it's not the root of all my delusions. So here we are talking about the very fundamental ignorance. That is the root of all the delusion. That is the root of all the samsara. That is the root of all the suffering. And so, but here, when it says ignorance, which is opposite of knowledge, and here we are not talking any kind of knowledge, just like the knowledge that is whatever this cup is made out of, But here is saying this particular knowledge of knowing the emptiness, the selflessness, and not knowing the selflessness or emptiness is the ignorance. And even we go further than that, it is not only not knowing and not understanding the emptiness or selflessness, but actually is apprehending the opposite of that knowledge, which is much more stronger. Not understanding, not knowing selflessness, emptiness itself is ignorance. But here, when it is fundamentally, it is even more stronger than that. It is actually misapprehending the reality. So it's much more stronger. Do you get it? Not knowing what this cup is made out of is ignorance. And maybe it might be made out of whatever, I don't know, material. Let's say, I don't know. I forgot there is a ceramic. Maybe it might be made out of ceramic, but then I believe that this is made out of a, kind of metal, bronze. That is much more was ignorance and not knowing what is made out of, and we get a lot of trouble, not because a lot of time not knowing, because we misapprehend the reality totally opposite way, and that's much more worse, and here is this fundamental ignorance. It's not just not knowing the reality, but it's misapprehending the reality and grasping the opposite of the reality, So, so that is why it is opposite, not suitable to mere absence of that wisdom. Mere absence of that wisdom means not having wisdom, not knowing it. It's not just that, or just something else. Therefore, it is antagonist. So it is just the opposite. The wisdom that relies emptiness, apprehend all the phenomena to be non-truly existence, and this ignorance apprehend to be truly existence. These two are totally opposite. The wisdom apprehend non-truly existing, and this ignorance apprehend or grasp to exist truly existence. That one is the ignorance. That is the very root of the samsara. That is the first of the 12 link where the evolution of samsara starts. From that first link, that ignorance, that fundamental ignorance. So that is where the very root of all the suffering, the root of all the delusion. So that is where that. So, and then, and within that, here it is saying superimposition. It is superimposition of self, So superimposition means that your mind project there which is not there. Yeah. So even in an object, there is no truly existing, but your ignorant project truly existing into the objects. That ignorance. Therefore, it superimposes to the object something which is not there. And what has been imposed, which is not in the object, is that truly existing or inherent existence, and imposed by that ignorance. And so, in terms of the ignorance, there are two types of ignorance. The ignorance of the persons and the ignorance of the phenomena. Okay, because of the objects, the basis. So, on the basis of your aggregate, then there's a sense of self, and then grasping that self to be truly or inherently existing is the ignorance that is apprehending the self. And then grasping, your body, your mind, or the cup, the iPad, the book, them as truly existing or inherently existing is the ignorant apprehending phenomena. Okay, so there are two types of, generally speaking, two types of ignorance. Okay, because of the object of the ignorance is two different objects: the persons and all other phenomena with non-persons. Okay, and so there is that. So then, how ignorance superimpose what nature, as it says there, So even though there is no self or phenomena existing by way of its own entity, without depending on other entities, other factors, when you apprehend that, the way of their own character or inherently, So here they all have this same meaning, existing by way of their own entity or their own power or by way of their own character, inherently, truly existing absolutely, ultimately. They all have same meaning here in Prasangika. These terms have same meaning. Okay, so sometimes they might change the terms, but and independently existing also is the same. Independently existence. So these all terms. Sometimes they use different terms, but they all mean same thing. Not truly existing, non-inherently existing, not existing by its own side or by its own entity, not existing or existing independently. So all of that. So there's so as it then there are a few different sources that how it is superimposed, and then in the sutra or Upali Sutra, and then Nagarjuna 60 Strengths of Reasonings. So they all say, even though all these phenomena, the self and all phenomena, are merely imputed by the mind, by the conceptions, even though they are merely imputed by our mind, our thought, our conceptions. That's the reality. That's the reality. The reality is all these phenomena on the basis, by depending on its basis, then is merely imputed by the thought, concept, mind as that object. Even though there is a reality, the way it appears to our mind and the way our ignorance grabs is our ignorance doesn't apprehend the thing to all these objects to apprehend as those objects as merely imputed, but instead it apprehends those objects to exist by its own entity, by its inherently, truly, absolutely. And so therefore, that's ignorance, because the way the things are in reality and the ignorance grabs is totally different. Hey Gishila, sorry, maybe I missed it, but why do we distinguish between the existence of phenomena and existing persons? First of all, because if we analyze how we get attached to, because again, due to attachment, then many delusion arises and problem arises. So there's a sense of me or I or self. That's innately, everyone feels that way. Innately from the beginning time, we all feel I or me or self. On the basis of that, then we get attached to the self, to self, I or me. Then we have the phenomena. Then we say, oh, my body, my mind, my cup, my iPad, my enemy. Then on the basis of that, then again, we get either attachments or with the anger and all of that. So therefore, in innate, because there is two different sense of self and other phenomena, which is not a self, but which is related with the self. And because of that, then we have to distinguish. That is how our mind innately appear and grasp, apprehend that way. And so therefore, that is why we kind of distinguish. And of course, when we talk phenomena, then it can be countless, In generally speaking, the self of persons is part of phenomena. But when here we say person and phenomena, so here is saying all other phenomena which non-persons. And specifically when we say phenomena here, mainly, of course, it includes all other phenomena, but mainly it refers to such as our body or our mind, our experience, because that is more we feel related, and on the basis of that, all the many other delusions arise on the basis of that. And so it will come later. Yeah. So as Lama Tsongkhapa says, all the worlds or all the phenomena, everything, the sentient beings and the world, the sentient beings live in, all of them, sentient being, non-sentient being, all of these are established, not established by way of their own entity or by its own side, by its own power, but by depending on its basis, is merely imputed by the mind, the conception and thought. So that is the meaning of the sutra, and that is the meaning of the Nagarjuna's 60 verses. So, and then again, Arya Deva's 400 stanza, again, he has similar, same again, different word, but basically saying again, all phenomena do not exist by its own power, by its own entity, but instead they all exist by merely imputed by the conceptions. So yeah. And so then also in the commentary, on his commentary, then it says, how, so then it give an example, the classical example of the snake, imputed to the rope. So again, I think this is a very classical example that is given, For example, there is a mistaking rope to be a snake, okay? Mistaking a snake to be a rope in certain conditions, maybe place where there's no snake, maybe it wouldn't be the case. But let's say New Mexico, okay, especially when we have rattlesnakes, snake, not only snake, poisonous like a rattlesnake, so we have to be careful. So in those situations, there is a little bit kind of dark, not so clear and distant, and there is a rope which has a dot which looks like a snake dot, and then the rope is kind of curling like a snake, and from distance you might think, oh, there is a snake, and the fear arises because it's a little dark, you cannot see so clearly, so then there you see, oh, there is snake, and because you see there is snake, then that gives rise to fear. Okay, there's the fear arising from, and maybe sometimes you might be very angry and upset as well. Not only fear, maybe let's say yesterday you found your cat or something was bitten by the snake, and or your dog or anything. And today then you say, oh, there's snake. There's fear as well as anger. Now you say, oh, this is the snake that which bite my cat, my dog, whatever that is. That's yesterday. So then that can give you a lot of other negative emotions, give rise to that. But then if you check, really check, and if you examine further, if you go maybe a little bit closer, or if you have a more clearer light, torch, or you switch on light, see it, then there is no snake at all. It's just a rope. But that rope, due to many causes and conditions, your mind has projected or superimposed as a snake in that rope. And so it's merely imputed by your mind, your conceptions. There's nothingness of snakeness in that rope at all. If you try to see the snakeness, whether it's part of the rope, the collection of the rope, the continuity of the rope, there's none of that. You cannot find snake, either each of these part, each part of the rope, neither you can find a snake in the collection of all parts, neither you can find snake in the continuity of that rope itself. So there is no snake at all, but even though it's not there due to certain causes and conditions, then your mind imputed that. On the basis of imputing and believing there is a snake, then that gives rise to fear, anger, and many other emotions. And then we suffer. It is saying same thing. All phenomena, the self and all phenomena, there's nothing that exists inherently or by its own entity, by its own power from the objective side at all. But due to many causes and conditions, due to our imprint, due to not realizing, due to not understanding the emptiness, and many other causes and conditions, then, there's appearance of that object as existing from its own side, by its own power, inherently, truly. And then our mind believe that, our ignorance believe that, apprehend that, grasp that way. And due to that, then, anger, attachment, jealousy, pride, all fear, anxiety, worry, and all those different harmful and hurtful, painful, negative emotion arises, and due to that we suffer. But again, if you analyze whether there is truly existing self, whether there is truly existing your body, whether there is inherently or truly existing your mind, experience, whether there is truly existence, cup, the book, iPad, all of that, there's not even a very tiniest of truly inherently existing in each of these objects. You cannot find inherently truly existing objects within each of those parts of that, neither the collection of that, neither the continuity of that, you cannot find in each of them. Just like the snake. And so therefore, just like the snake is merely imputed to the rope, same way, inherently truly existence is merely imputed by the mind, to all the to the objects. So all phenomena are merely imputed. So basically merely imputed by the objects, just like the snake on the rope. So then here I think this is Lama Tsongkhapa said these statements 290 explain that from the point of view of being imputed while not being established by its way of its own entity or by inherently by its own power, attachment and so forth resemble a snake imputed to the rope. So whether it's attachment, the experience, or whether it's the object itself, all those phenomena. So that is where you have to find the difference. At the latter, which is like snake being imputed in the rope, is not the same as attachment and so forth. Attachment, anger, loving kindness, compassion, all these mental states, as well as our body, as well as our belongings, all of that, in terms whether or not they conventionally exist. Even though they both are merely imputed, but the snake does not exist in the rope conventionally. Whereas this cup exists conventionally. I exist conventionally. My mind, my body exists conventionally. My experience, such as attachment, anger, jealousy, ignorance, all of them exist conventionally. So that is one thing again. Even though they are same in being merely imputed, but they are not in same whether they exist conventionally or not. One exists unconventionally, one does not exist unconventionally. Okay, so I think maybe it might come later, maybe, I don't know. But in order to exist something, to exist conventional, then there need to be three reasonings. And so maybe we don't need to, probably maybe it might come, so something to exist conventionally. So I think that is one thing, because if you don't understand this, if you cannot make this, if we cannot differentiate these two things, then sometimes people say, oh, if everything is merely imputed, then, then we can say anything. Do you get it? And that there is that kind of confusion comes. And so that is where it is important to make this distinguishing difference and distinguishing these two. Even though including the snake on the rope is merely imputed, as well as all the phenomena are merely imputed, but in terms of them existing conventional or not, then there is a difference, So that is, then detailed explanation and apprehension of the self. So I think we already already touched on that, When there's a sense of appearance of self to us, when there's a sense of appearance of self or I or me, how does the sense or I or me or the person appear to us? Does it appear as that the self or the I or the person is merely imputed by our conception, our thoughts? Or does it appear as existing by its own entity, by its inherently, by its own side? Or does it appear to our mind, oh, this me or I or self person is merely imputed? It doesn't appear to us the way it appeared to, at least to me, because I can't say for all of us, because there might be some people who have a realization of emptiness, and for them it might appear merely appearance. But to me, any objects, here we are talking about the self or I or persons, doesn't appear as appearing, doesn't appear that persons or the self merely imputed. Instead, it appears as existing by its own power, objectively from its own side, by its own entity, inherently. Not only there is that appearance, then my mind, the ignorance, apprehend and grasp the way it appeared to my mind. And the apprehending the self or I, the persons, as inherently or existing by its own side, that is the ignorance of the persons. And then, when I see my hand or my feet, my leg, my eye, my nose, it doesn't appear but not as existing by merely imputed. The nose, the ears, the eyes, legs, the hands, the body, or even my experience, my mind. The way it appeared that all of these objects as existing from its own entity by its own power inherently. And not only it appeared that way, then my mind, the ignorant mind, grasps and apprehends them as inherently existing by its own power, its own, and that is the ignorance of phenomena. That is and so these are the two ignorance. Okay, these are the two kind of ignorance. In terms of there is some kind of okay, maybe that is okay. And then the meaning of existing by its own power or by its inherent existence also is same as existing independently. As I mentioned, they all have same meaning. And so in that, then here it said, in the commentary, the 400 stanzas by the, Aradeva, where it says, in this regard to so-called self is entity things that does not depend on anything else. Okay? Inherent existence. So that is here, something that with inherent existence means something that does not depend on other factors. Do you get it? So that is, again, we have to remember that all the time. When we talk about inherently existing, truly existence, existing by its own entity, by its own power, it means it's something existing by its own entity. That means it doesn't depend on other factors for it to exist. Otherwise, it will not be able to exist by its own entity because it is existing by depending on other entity, other factors. And so, same with inherently existence. If something exists inherently, that is always, it should be the way it is always, never changing. That was always like that, it will always be like that. That is inherent meanings. That means it's not depending on other factors. And so it has same meaning of independent existence. So, we can use many different terms that you see, in all these Madhyamaka teachings. They use different terms: inherent existence, truly existing, absolutely existing, ultimately existing. Inherent is existing by its own entity, but they all have similar meanings. They all mean same thing in Prasangika point of view, and so that is where it's. And so it's non-existing selflessness. So it's non-existent means non-existent, non-inherent existence is a selflessness. Non-independent existence is the selflessness. And so within the selflessness, then there is a selflessness of person and there is selflessness. So just as there is true ignorance, the ignorance of the person and ignorance of the phenomena, the ignorance that apprehend person to be inherently existing, then there is ignorance, the phenomena to apprehending the phenomena that exists, inherent existence. Same way in terms of emptiness or selflessness, there is true selflessness, the selflessness of person and selflessness of the phenomena. Okay, so. And maybe it might come later. In order to have a complete, unmistaken and complete understanding or substance of person, then you need to have an understanding of substance of phenomena as well. What is Nagarjuna's in his I think Precious Garland, even though I'm not 100%, I think it's in Precious Garland. As long as you have grasping, meaning here truly or inherently existent, as long as you are grasping to the phenomena, then you will not be able to overcome the grasping to the self of the persons. So what it means is, unless you have the understanding or selflessness of the phenomena, then you will not be able to overcome the subtle level of self-grasping of the persons. And His Holiness, the Lama shared his experience. He said long time ago, through his practice, studying, meditating, and practice over the time, he came to inherent meditations, over the time, with a total certainty and conviction there is no self. When he was doing that kind of analysis, and so there was no grasping to the self at all, when he had that kind of realizations. So there's no sense of self, and so there was no grasping. But then he can see he has grasping to the other phenomena. While he didn't have grasping to the self, but he can see there's a grasping to the phenomena. And then he understood, he haven't really understood the selfness of persons, the subtle level of that. He have understood only the gross level of that. He have understood only the gross level of selfness of persons. And so therefore, they're still grasping to the phenomena. And so therefore, again, then he said this Nagarjuna point, statement, make more so clear with his own experience. So in order to have a subtle, complete realization of selfness of person, then you need to also have a understanding of selfness of persons. Because when we think of self, when we think of self, how does self appear to you? We are not even talking about the inherently, not truly. Even first, there's appearance of our aggregates. Sometimes you see your body and then you see, oh, me. Or sometimes you think of your experience, you know. Your mind is unhappy, then you, on the basis of that, then, oh, I'm unhappy. You know, sense of I, me, or self arises on the basis of the aggregates. Whether ourselves or even when you see, oh, you know, let's say John, when I see his body, then I say it's John. Or when I, you know, so on the basis of aggregate, then you identify someone or yourself. And so therefore, as long as you are grasping to your aggregate, then the self which arises on the basis of that aggregate will still have a certain subtle level of some grasping, you know, very subtle level. So therefore, in order to have correct and complete subtle realization of substance of person, then we need to have also the realization of substance of phenomena as well, you know. Even though in generally speaking, amount to selflessness, first you have the realization of substance of person and the substance of the phenomena. Because it says that to generally speaking, is more easy to have an understanding of certain persons than the certainness of person of the phenomena. So therefore, even when you're in the meditations, when it's present, first it presents the certainness of person, and then it presents certainness of phenomena. And that is how when we meditate, then we try to meditate on certainness of person first, and then certainness of phenomena. Normally, that is how it is. But at the same time, in order to have a complete understanding of persons, you have to have understanding of certainnesses of the phenomena as well. So anyway, what it just came in my mind, so that I just wanted to. I'm not sure it probably could come. Then and so then there is here trying to differentiate between the I don't know. I guess maybe yeah. Even within the selfness of persons, there is a selfness of persons, and there is ignorance, that view transitory collections, you know, that is the very root of all the sufferings. You know, so distinction between the apprehension of self and the view of the transitory collections. And normally, again, you see in many scriptures, many texts, whether it is sutra as well as commentaries, Indian commentaries, as well as Tibetan commentaries. Sometimes you find a statement that say, you know, the view of transitory collection is the very root of all the suffering. And sometimes you find, you know, the ignorance and grasping self is the ignorance grasping the self, which means truly existing self, is the root of all phenomena. So here he's saying, so you see those different statements, you know, many, sometimes you find the view of transitory collection is the root of all the suffering, all the delusions. Sometimes you find the ignorance that is grasping the self is the root of all the suffering or the delusions. So here he's saying, does that mean they are same or not? Does that mean transitory view of collection and the ignorance that's grasping the self, are they same or not? So here Lama Tsongkhapa is saying slightly distinguishing, is saying they are not exactly same. So maybe first, transitory view has two, that is that observing the objects, the self, and observing the objects, mind, which belong to me, So there's two transitories. So first there is a sense of I, or by depending or relating on our aggregates. Then there's a sense of me or I or self, spontaneously, innately, and then apprehending that self to be inherently or truly existing. That's a transitory, view of the self. And then on the basis of that, then there is sense of, by depending on our eyes, our body, our nose, our body, then there is my, like feeling of mind, whether it's our body or whether it's our mind, our experience, there's sense of mind, on the basis of that self, there's sense of mind. And not only the sense of mind, inherent existing mind. And so that grasping is then transitory view of grasping mind, self and the mind. So there are two kinds of transitory view. Did you get it? Are we clear? No? One is grasping the self as inherently existing. That's a transitory view. Yourself, okay? By yourself that belong to you on the basis of your aggregate, then there's a sense of me or I or self inherently existing. That is a transitory view of self. Then there is sense of mind inherent existence. Mind, not me, but then you go beyond that and it's mine, my body, my mind. So my experience like that. So there is sense of inherently existing mind, So that is another level of transitory view. So there's two different types of transitory view. Okay, so that has to be related with yourself. But in order to have a ignorance grasping the self, then it doesn't have to relate with your own self. For example, me grasping, my ignorance grasping. I'm saying John because John, I see him there. So, okay. Or Steve, all of you, as inherently existing. Okay. It's a ignorance grasping a self or persons. Okay. But that is not transitory view. Do you get this? Because that is person, okay? The object is person, another person, not yourself, but another person. And you are apprehending, your ignorance apprehending that person to be truly or inherently existence. Okay, so that is ignorance apprehending the self of the person, but it's not transitory view, the view of transitory collections. Because in order for the view of transitory collection, it has to be yourself or yours, my or mine. Whereas that is something that is not you or yours, is someone else. So that is the distinguishing it is making here. Do you get it? Yeah. So, okay. So I think that is, and I think And I think there is also in that sections there is maybe it can be within the different Buddhist schools, when you try to find where is the self or I or me or persons, some of the Buddhist schools says, the 5 aggregates. When you try to find it, then you find in aggregates, and then in all the 5 aggregates. And then some of them, such as Mind Holy School, they will say you will find in the mind basis of all. That is when you try to find where is the self, then you find in that the mind basis of all. They say that is the example, that is the persons. If you go and find where is that self, me or I, persons. And then some other, such as the other Madhyamaka, not the Prasangika, Sovatantrika Madhyamaka, then they said they find the persons into the 6th mental consciousness, and some of them in the continuity of mental consciousness. But Prasangika point of view is a bit different. They say when you analyze where is the self, you cannot find it anywhere in any of that. Neither you can find in any of 5 aggregate, neither you can find in mental consciousness, neither you can find in continued each part of mental consciousness or continue with the mental consciousness or collection of mental, neither you find in any of the aggregates, neither collections of the aggregate, neither continuing of the aggregates. So that is the difference. Prasangika, when you don't analyze it, there is self that exists conventionally, that's merely imputed on the basis of aggregate. But when you try to find it, where is the self, then you cannot find it. And that is huge difference. While you are unable to find it with that kind of ultimate analysis, at the same time you are able to establish and proceed that there is a self. And all other schools, they struggle with that. That is why they try to find in something. Because for them, if we cannot find either within the collections, each of part of collection or each of aggregates, or either in collection or either in continuum or either one of them, then they find very hard to establish it exists. They find very hard to proceed that it actually exists on conventional level. And that is where why the problems comes. Whereas Madhyamika, the Prasangika, while you do that kind of ultimate, you cannot find it, but at the same time, you are able to proceed and establish to exist. And this is said to be the difficult point. This is the difficult point. And I think so anyway, so I think there was some explanation on that little bit of different schools of thoughts, what the person is, and so, yeah, so we'll do a dedication, okay. Well, I guess there is one question, I don't know, I think maybe next time. Due to the merit of this virtuous action, may I quickly attain the state of Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel Bodhisattva that has not arisen, arise and grow, and may that which is arising not diminish but increase more and more. The wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparable kind in Yaso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Tuzu Changshin Changwen Jiawe Ten Zin Jiang Bebe Kunzu Tokpa Chosun Kuwe Le Mo Tuzu Pa Da So Du Je Gwen Du Sha Ben Sho. I think without going in detail, I don't know the questions. Gisela, why does it seem there is debate on this topic when Heart Sutra? Again, I don't know how to read it. Succinctly sum it up. Why is there different views, you know? Well, we spoke last week, you know, in the sutra, there are all this, in some sutra, it said there is inherent existence. In some sutra, they say no inherent existence. In some sutra, then they differentiate some phenomena are inherent existence, some phenomena are non-inherent existence. So therefore, we can't depend. That is why the interpretive meaning sutra and definitive meaning sutra, and then that's why analysis come. If you can't rely on the sutra literally, because there are different. You will find too much contradictions if you take it literally, and so therefore at the end you have to make the reasoning and logic to see which sutra can be taken literally and face value, and which sutra has to be interpreted for different, and so that is where it comes. So therefore, so that is why this debate and view come, because then it has to be interpreted differently. Yeah. Okay, as thanks to that, I missed last week. So that is the thing. So when you miss it, sometimes then that become, so then you have to go and watch or read and watch. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Good night.